it's okay. So if you're doing some workout and it's not quite what you wanted it to be, like it was as good as you could make it. That's all it is. So it's okay for not every workout to be perfect or to have a bad run sometimes. And have, it's totally fine.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 135 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you for being here today. You are awesome, and I'm so appreciative of you for giving me the time today to listen to this podcast episode. I know we're being encouraged more and more to step away from social media, to step away from being connected all the time. So I'm appreciative that you are here with me right now. Thank you. Last week, we had David Epstein on the show, who was a dream guest of mine. I could not barely believe I was talking to him. He was wonderful. We had a great conversation and I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. For those of you who aren't sure who he is and haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to it. He is the author of Range and The Sports Gene. Now, today we have the deputy sports editor of the New York Times, Matt Futterman. Matt is the author of the book Running to the Edge, and we talk a lot about his book today. It's really interesting. I'm not typically someone who reads a lot of books about running unless I'm researching for an episode. This one is a book not about him. It's about Bob Larson, but it was so interesting. It was fascinating to hear. I really enjoyed it. And you're going to love Matt's approach to running, his love of the sport. He's a great guy. And I really enjoyed this interview, as well as his interview with Michael Gervais. You know, I love Michael Gervais. I've talked about him many times, the sports psychologist. He also did an episode with Matt that I definitely recommend is worth listening to. I'll put a link in the show notes to that as well. It was my birthday a few days ago. I turned 31. Any chance, if you haven't already, you could leave me a review on iTunes as a gift. I would be so appreciative of that. Thank you so much. I'm not going to push you anymore, but I'm just saying it would be a nice gift. Thank you to Body Health, TurboTrack.me, and MetPro for sponsoring. Let's go meet Matt. Thank you to Body Health for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. Body Health is a wonderful company. You know that, right? Because I really do assess the companies before I work with them. I turned away yet another sponsor recently because I just couldn't see myself using their product at all, and it just didn't feel real. Yes, that was leaving money on the table, but my integrity is still intact, and that's more important to me. Body Health was founded by Dr. David Minkoff, who, by the way, has a new book out, The Search for the Perfect Protein, if you're interested. Dr. David is an MD who founded Body Health in 2000, and in his practice, he concentrates on alternative and complementary approaches. Body Health has a whole host of products to give your body a boost, and especially if your body is working through something stressful like injury, recovering from surgery, sickness, pregnancy, or postpartum, or anything else that means it's working hard, Body Health products are really going to be there to support you. Especially, I love Perfect Amino, which contains all 8 essential amino acids and is quickly absorbed by the body. Each 10-gram serving of Perfect Amino is equivalent to 35 grams in dietary protein, which is something many of us are deficient in. I know I definitely struggle to get enough. You can get 10% off the entire Body Health website by visiting tinamuir.com/aminos. That's TINAMUIR.com/AMINOS. Matt, thank you so much for joining me today on the Running for Real podcast. I am excited to talk to you, and I think this is going to be a real fascinating conversation that my listeners are just going to love. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. One of the great things about running these days is all these running podcasts. And for running nerds like me, it keeps me it keeps my ears very busy.
Do you ever feel like you have analysis paralysis though? Because I feel like with so many podcasts now, sometimes I know there's tons of things I want to listen to, but I feel like there's nothing I want to listen to because I just feel there's so many things that I can't focus on any of them. Do you ever feel like that?
No, what I feel like is there's a lot of different advice out there, and there's so many things like I want to try that I hear about. And so like, that's my frustration. I want to do this race. I want to try this workout. I want to do this. And I just I don't have that many hours in the day. I don't have enough days in the week where I can do all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So I just I sort of wish I was 20 years. I guess we all wish we were 20 years younger, but I wish I was 20 years younger and, could just run whenever I wanted to, wherever I wanted to, and do all the things that I hear about people doing.
Well, especially, you and I were talking before we started recording about Claire Gallagher in Western States. And especially now with races like 100 miles or even 50 miles, or, you've got triathlons, you've got obstacle races, there's all these cool things that you can try. And I tend to push it off and say, I'll do that when I'm older. But I don't know when I'll get there, whether I'll still want to be doing the things I'm doing now. There's too many cool events and, fun things to do with not enough opportunities, especially something big like an ultra. You have to give yourself a good few months to get ready for that one. So, yeah.
Well, I know I don't have much interest personally in obstacle races.
Mm-hmm.
And the ultras, it's funny. I love to swim. I love to ride my bike to work. I don't have that much interest in putting swimming, running, and cycling together and racing.
Even once, you wouldn't want to do it just to see?
I think I definitely want to do it once, maybe a short one. My oldest brother does triathlons, and he's been trying to get me to do one with him for years. So I would very much like to do one with him, but I have this terrible fear of getting kicked in the face during the swim.
Uh-huh.
I sort of look at pictures of triathlons and these people running into the water, and all I can think of is how do you not get kicked?
I think you do, don't you? Most people get kicked in the face.
I
remember Siri Lindley talking about it and how she got kicked in the face, and it was a pretty normal thing to happen.
Yeah. That's just horrible.
I know.
You don't get kicked in the face when you're running marathons. And so I have that sort of a rational fear of that. And so I've so far avoided it at this point. But yeah, I think at some point I will do one. It will mean though, I'll have to invest in.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And a better bike, because right now, the bike I ride is my Schwinn High Plains mountain bike, which I bought when I was, I want to say maybe a junior in college in 1989.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had the same bike for 30 years. It's an absolute tank. It's fallen off the roof of my car. My wife was once driving into a garage and she forgot that the bike was on top of the car, and it got ripped off the car and went crashing down, and it had some bumps and bruises, but it was fine. The wheel was all bent. I had to get a new wheel, but it was fine. So, and that's actually, I realized that's not suitable equipment for triathlon. So I have to invest in that. Anyway, those are my.
I think it's a serious investment for any of these. But anyway, back to, you said about trying different workouts and different things. Surely after writing this book, you have the answer, because that's kind of what you've gone across with your book, Running to the Edge. That's a lot of what you talked about, just this essentially godfather of this running boom that we're in right now, and how he really figured out how to get the most out of people. So you of all people shouldn't need any other ears or cooks in your kitchen, right?
Well, I think everybody always needs, we're all aren't. I mean, look, you're an elite runner, aren't you? Always trying to pick something up that sounds cool, or try something different, or shake it up a little bit. I do believe very strongly in the things that Bob Larson talked about, and the sort of overarching principles in the sort of big picture of what Bob believed in, the three overall sort of foundational principles of, going to your edge, going to your threshold, training with a group, and just believing in yourself, believing that where you're born, how you're born, whether you have money or not, whether you have a sponsor or not, that's not your destiny. Your destiny is what you make of it. So those three things, yes, I believe in. But within that, it's I'm always sort of curious as to what these people are doing or what
that's true.
or where they train. So those are the sort of little nuggets.
Yeah.
And I think also your body appreciates it. Like I think we all don't realize how quickly our body adapts to the routines that we put it through. And then it gets sort of lazy in a weird way. It gets very used to that. And then the minute you shake things up, like you feel so sore the next day because you did something your body wasn't used to.
That's
and
true.
I think that's like can be a lesson in, well, there's a whole bunch of muscles that I'm not working out, and that could make me stronger and better.
That's true. Good point. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Okay, so let's talk about your book a bit more. Now, I have to admit, usually I like reading books where I can learn something, I can take away kind of what we were just talking about with training. Like, I like being able to like pull away something. This is, a skill, a trait, a habit, something I can use. But your book wasn't that. But I absolutely couldn't put it down. Like I went through it in 2 or 3 days, loved it. The only time I had to put it down was when my daughter would physically grab it from my hands, grab a pen, and start trying to draw on it. But I really, really enjoyed it. It was beautifully written, just couldn't stop reading it. And for those who are listening who haven't heard of it, which maybe many of them haven't, as it is a newer book out, tell us about, where the idea came from and what it's about.
Well, first of all, I'm going to say that, I have 3 daughters, and it's probably the biggest compliment I could ever receive when a mother of a young child tells me she actually read my book, because there's no one busier or who has less time for herself than a new mother. So I realize you're probably deciding like, do I keep reading or do I take a shower today? For some reason, you decided to keep reading. So that is a massive compliment, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you.
In terms of thank you. In terms of where the concept for the book came from, I always wanted to write a running book. I'm kind of an obsessive runner. I've run 23 marathons, although I didn't run a marathon for 14 years. I sort of had an in-between period, even though I was running every day, just about. And I was always looking for the right story that could get across the emotions that I feel when I'm running, the ideas that I thought running sort of generated, and just convey what I feel like the meaning of running really was. And I really did not want to write a book necessarily about me. I just didn't think my running story was all that interesting. And I didn't want to write the sort of what I talk about or what I think about when I think about running. Although Haruki Murakami's book by that title is a terrific book, but he's a lot better writer than I am. So I was always sort of looking around for the right story. And then I had gotten to know Bob Larson through Mebka Fuzgi. So I had been talking to Bob for a few years. And then in 2015, I got invited to watch a documentary that had been made by one of Bob's former runners.
City Slickers, right?
Yeah, City Slickers Can't Stay With Me. And it was mostly about Bob and Meb, but there was also laced into that this backstory, or really Bob's origin story, which was with this running group in the 1960s and 70s in San Diego called the Hummel Toads. And they were his lab rats. And this was the 60s and 70s when just no one had a clue about how to train or why to train. And there was nothing more rebellious or countercultural that you could do than go run 15, 20 miles on a Saturday morning. And yet that's what Bob and his runners were doing, because he was obsessed with finding out and figuring out the best way to get people to run really far, really fast. It was a real passion play on his part. And I saw there was a picture of the Toads that was in the movie. And it was a picture that was snapped right after they won. They came out of nowhere to win the 1976 National Cross Country Championships, back when that was just about the biggest race in the country other than the Boston Marathon. And I just looked at that picture and they were all scraggly and had beards and just looked like a mess and looked like, I don't know, the Eagles or the band or some other, the Doobie Brothers or something. And I just thought, I have to get to know those guys. That might be my story.
This podcast is sponsored by TurboTrack.me. TurboTrack.me is an amazing platform that offers live, streamed, and on-demand workout videos from a wide variety of professional instructors. Now, I've loved looking at it for the stretching, meditation, their strength training classes, and the instructors are highly qualified and you can interact with them after the class, which is pretty cool and makes you feel like you're involved in something, even if you can't go to a gym or you don't have a gym near you. It's wonderful. They also have this incredible tracking system within the app that integrates with several wearable heart rate devices, if that is something you enjoy. I know many of you are huge heart rate buffs, so this will definitely be for you. The app tracks heart rate, resting heart rate, calories, intensity, distance, heart rate zones, and recovery. Add that to the streaming aspect, and it's definitely worth the sign up. TurboTrack.me is offering us a free 90-day trial. That's 3 months. And if you continue beyond the 90 days, you'll receive a free forearm heart rate device. Now, all you need to do is go to turbotrack.me and use the promo code TINA to get this special offer and stream those great classes. You can track what you do and you will absolutely love it. So once again, that's TINA is the promo code, and go to turbotrack.me to go get your 3 months for free.
There was a picture of the Toads that was in the movie, and it was a picture that was snapped right after they won. They came out of nowhere to win the 1976 National Cross Country Championships, back when that was just about the biggest race in the country other than the Boston Marathon. And I just looked at that picture and they were all scraggly and had beards and just looked like a mess and looked like, I don't know, the Eagles or the band or some other, the Doobie Brothers or something. And I just thought, I have to get to know those guys. That might be my story.
Yeah.
And so I talked to the guy who made the film, and he said, sure, here are their numbers. And I started calling them and asking them a very simple question, which was, why did you run? That was really the question I was sort of shooting to answer, which is, why do we run? And each of them had a passionate answer about that. Not one of them said like, well, I don't know, I kind of liked it and I was good at it, so I just kind of did it. Everyone had like an incredible story about the passion they felt for the activity of running, for competing, for trying to go far, for trying to go fast. And the story just sort of built itself from there.
Yeah. And do they all still run now, those guys?
Most of them run some. Some of them, most of them run a little bit, although a couple of them have switched over to cycling just because they're a little freaky at this point. I mean, they're in their late 60s. Yeah. But one of the guys in the book, Kirk Pfeffer, who when I asked him why he ran, and he's painted this picture of being like 6 years old and living in San Diego, and he used to wake up earlier than everybody else, and he was really shy. And he would just wake up and he would want to be outside running around his block. And he talked about like the very specific smell of whatever was in bloom during that season in San Diego. So forsythia and eucalyptus, and it was really just sort of an incredible portrait that he painted when he was explaining it. And when I went to see him, he now lives in near Salt Lake City. And he was sort of famous among his friends for just always going really too far. He was just addicted to distance. And I said, so you're still running? He said, yeah, I am still running some, but I'm a little hurt because I was hurt for a while. And then I tried to come back and I ran like 15 miles on my first day back. And it was,
Never changed.
The spots on the leopard never really changed.
That's funny. And what about Bob himself? Did you consult with him for the book?
Oh, well, Bob is the main character in the book, in the same way that Billy Beane is the main character in Moneyball for people who read the Michael Lewis book. And Billy Beane's the president of the Oakland A's. And at the time the book was being written, was the general manager and who sort of pursued all these very counterintuitive ideas to creating a baseball team. But when Michael Lewis started writing that book, he had no idea that Billy Beane was going to be his main character. And I knew Bob was going to be a main character, but I didn't really know that he was going to be really the main character and the sort of hero of the story. Mm-hmm. And I spent a tremendous amount of time with Bob, and it just became clear as I was talking to him that this was just about the only person who was there at the beginning of the running boom in this country, and really there before the running boom. Mm-hmm. We're talking about, he was researching this stuff in the early and addicted to running in the early 60s and late 50s. And he was there through the running boom and became the Olympics, U.S. Olympics coach.
Yeah.
And then he's sort of the central figure in the revival of American distance running in the 2000s. And so we're talking about, a 50 plus year career. And he became the person whose story that this really was.
Yeah.
And it caught him off guard because I'm a reporter, so I'm not in business with Bob in any way. It's not an as told to book or anything like that. So I wasn't showing him the manuscript as I was writing it. The first time he saw it was when I got a galley copy of it, and I needed to really fact check it. And so I sent him a copy of it, and I said, why don't you have a look at this? And he's a very humble person. He thought doing the book in the first place was a terrible, idiotic idea. Nobody would care about it. And he was a little taken aback. As he said, I was not ready for this. You told me you were writing about the toads. You're writing about me here. And I sort of figured he had figured it out somewhere along the way. But I think he just never had the idea that he was going to be the main character in a book. So it took a little adjusting for him. But I'm happy to say that, as he absorbed it and as it got closer to publication, he is very well adjusted to it.
Oh, I'm sure. What an honor for him.
Yeah, he's 80 years old, and I think he's completely thrilled that someone has documented his life and sees great value in it. And hopefully people will read the book for years and know the important role that he played in running, along with, guys like Dellinger and Bowerman and Kara Switzer and all kinds of other people, all kinds of other heroes of American running.
Absolutely. And I actually hadn't seen City Slickers. It's still on my list of things to watch, but I didn't know half of the stuff about Bob Larson, and even, I think most people listening may know him as Meb's coach, but may not know too much beyond that. And I had interviewed him. I sent you that interview once before, and I didn't even know all that stuff. And now I feel kind of almost embarrassed that I didn't take the most of that opportunity, because even though I saw it as a big deal, I don't think I realized quite the role he played in, like you say, American distance running. And on that note, I want to kind of, pick a few topics or things that stood out to me about Bob Larson. And this does feel a bit weird talking about someone who's not in the room, but at the same time, you've done the research. And I also love that you kind of came at this from like a journalistic approach, in that you could kind of say things as the outsider, essentially, that maybe he couldn't say himself because they may be controversial or maybe kind of just not his personality to say. So I wanted to go over a few things, if that's okay with you. But the first thing I wanted to start with was, the book, you kind of show that Bob picks things up as he goes in his childhood, things he learns, and which eventually apply to his coaching and running, within his own running career, the mistakes he made, within his coaching career. Now, my husband being a track and field cross country coach, this really hits home.
He's been coaching for 10 years, and we see a lot of the kind of struggles he goes through in the coaching world. And yes, things have changed a bit since Bob was coaching, with the number of universities, just kind of the way things are run. But when you look at Bob's coaching career and you see him coaching someone like Meb, you're like, or even, working with Dina, and many of these, the top elites that he worked with, it's easy to say, oh, well, he must have just been lucky to get these top athletes. And that's, it's very easy to think that everything fell into his lap. But your book really showed how he built, how he was the underdog, how people rejected him, how he liked him and Meb liked coming at things with a bit of a chip on their shoulder. So maybe for the listeners that don't know, tell us a bit about that for someone looking at Bob thinking, of course, everything worked out for him.
Well, I think I'll start at the beginning, which is the main reason I think people don't know him or haven't heard very much about him is because, that's who Bob is. Bob very easily 25 years ago could have written his own book called, The Larson Way or something like that. Mm-hmm. Or he could have turned himself into a brand and gone all around, giving lectures and really tried to sort of become capital B, capital L Bob Larson, in a big kind of way. But that's just not what he was in it for. I mean, this comes from the heart for him. This was not, he wanted to win and wanted to, get paid as a college coach and stuff. Yeah. But this was not like a brand building, money making endeavor for him in terms of his running career. This is completely a passion play. And I think, honestly, that's one of the reasons Bob and I get along so well is because, that's where I come to writing and sports writing and running writing and journalism is that, you'd be an idiot if you went into this business thinking you were going to get rich doing it. Like, you have to do it because you love it and because it's fun or you think it's going to be fun. And often it is fun. So that's one of the reasons why you don't hear so much about him or haven't heard so much about him. And, I think that's just incredibly important in terms of his sort of philosophy and his approach to running is that at the heart of it is love. At the heart of it is passion. And, this better than anyone. It is being a long distance runner. It's just backbreaking is the wrong word, but it is a tough endeavor in terms of sports. I mean, look, I'm sure golfers work hard. I'm sure it's no fun being out on the range for hours a day, swinging your club, practicing your putting, all kinds of stuff like that. I know that takes a tremendous amount of discipline, but, I don't care. It's not running, 23 miles a day, at altitude, putting yourself through those workouts. It's just, that it's got to come from a place of love or else you're completely screwed. And I think that's what unites a lot of people. I don't know if that answers
it does.
What you're getting at. But that's sort of the essence of where Bob is. And that's what I think ties together so many of the people who ran with him and what he sought out from the beginning. And so even when people were not so much rejecting him, but not paying attention to him, not taking him seriously, because, look, this was a guy who was they started out at Monte Vista High School in the East County of San Diego. And then he moved for, a decade essentially to Grossmont Junior College and turned it into essentially the best collegiate distance program in the country, even though it was drawing kids from essentially 8 area high schools. Think about that. You're at the University of Oregon and you can draw kids from all over the country. And there's this little school in Southern California that is put together a team with guys whose times are really as good as anybody's times. And they're doing it from this tiny little geographical area. And then after that, he moves to UCLA. But at the time that he moves to UCLA is not really very good at track and field anymore. It's sort of down in the dumps, and he needs to rebuild it, and he does. And he, within 7 or 8 years, they are national champions. And it is certainly not the place that you go to if you're a distance runner.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob sort of switched out of distance, focusing on distance when he went to UCLA, because the key to winning national championships as college is, having those quarter milers, having thoroughbreds who can do so many events and win so many points.
Mm-hmm.
But then he recruits Meb, who's a distance runner, to come to UCLA, even though it's really not a great long distance place, because there's not that many great places to run right around the campus.
Although I will argue and say that on the grand scheme of a lot of places that now, have colleges, with the expansion of things, the area, that whole California stretch really is a bit different to kind of the way I'm coming at it, being, I live in Kentucky right now, or my husband, his job is in Kentucky, his job is in Michigan. Before that, a whole lot harder to recruit people to those two places than it would be to California. But I get your point, and he did definitely turn it around, and it was really cool to read that, and enjoyed reading that.
I guess what I'm saying is, like, the national championship last year, Northern Arizona won, right?
Again, that's a very perfect place to train.
Right, that's a great place to recruit people, because you're at elevation. It's perfect. I mean, look, Los Angeles is an amazing place to be, wonderful place to go. But if I'm a distance runner, I'm not sure I'm going there, because then I have to run up the middle of La Cienega. Like that's my run, or I've got to get in a van and I've got to drive out to Malibu, or I've got, there's just a lot of cars.
Yeah.
And so and Meb himself almost transferred to Arkansas in the middle of his time at UCLA, because he was kind of all alone there as a distance runner.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I want to talk more about Meb and his journey in a minute. But before, as you were talking about golf, being the deputy sports editor at the New York Times, now you love to run, obviously love when you get to write a running piece, or when someone writes a running piece. You did a great piece on Sarah Sellers, which you sent me, and I'm sure most of the audience have read it when that came out. Honestly, with us, how do you feel when you have to do kind of other sports? Is there kind of a part of you that does think that way, like my sport's better than yours kind of thing? Or do you have to kind of bury that deep down and just look at it objectively?
I think as journalists, we're all drawn to the things we love the most. But what I'm sort of agnostic when it comes to which sports. What I'm really addicted to is great stories. Mm-hmm. So if there's a great story about a kid playing marbles, I'm going to want to pursue it.
Okay.
Last February, I was, sort of leading our coverage and overseeing our coverage of the Olympics in South Korea. And I was on a van with our great reporter, John Branch. And we were just talking about our kids. And he mentioned how his son was going to these Rubik's Cube competitions, and how he was kind of a different kid. And he had really sort of begun to find his tribe through competing in these speed Rubik's Cube competitions, which, as you might imagine, attract a certain kind of kid. And I was sitting there and I said, John, how come you have not written this story? This is an unbelievable story about, yes, there's a competition here, and yes, there's a quote unquote sport involved, but that's what we're all doing. We're all just trying to get through the day and find our people and find our tribe. And, that's one of my favorite stories that I worked on last year, because it was so human. And it didn't matter whether that was about a runner finding her tribe with the cross country team in high school for the first time, or this kid who's, kind of a loner growing up in Marin County who finally finds his friends by going to Las Vegas to a Rubik's Cube competition.
That is cool.
So I'm agnostic. I love to write about running, and I love to read about, I'll read just about anything about any race or anything anywhere. But what I'm really super drawn to is, characters and narratives.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for explaining that. All right, so let's go back to Bob. And, the book is called Running to the Edge. And Bob talks a lot about kind of exactly that, running to the edge. And essentially that kind of means threshold, or some people call it tempo. So for those listening who, maybe thinking, oh, well, what is this secret sauce? What is this You mentioned it at the very beginning as one of the 3 things that Bob believes in, but how can people incorporate that into their training? What does that mean by running to the edge?
I think it means doing the thing that you're kind of afraid of. So many people ask me, like, did Bob make you a better runner? What did you learn from Bob about running? And the simplest answer is that I was like a big volume person before I started in with Bob. When I would train for a marathon, I would sort of stick to my daily routine of like 6 or 8 miles and then slowly build up my weekend run. And I was not really paying attention to how hard I was going and how fast I was going. And Bob really taught me the importance of not only paying attention to that, not every day, but on the days where you were really trying to like make something of it. Because I do really believe that sometimes you just need to go and leave your watch at home and not worry about how far you're going, how fast you're going, and sort of celebrate the fact that you have this body and you can make it move in a certain way and be outside if the weather is permitting that. And you're not in Michigan, we're trying to tread over ice in January.
Or February or March or April.
Right. Exactly. So it's the idea of, going to the edge, and the scientists would tell you it's, your lactate threshold, although I think most of us don't prick our fingers and test our blood exactly where our lactate threshold is, but we can feel it. It's that place where, if you go a step or 2 faster, you're not going to be able to breathe normally. And if you go a step or 2 slower, it's going to be much easier. You're in a spot that's not comfortable. And it's the idea of learning how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that's something that, all of us can take into our lives after we stop running, after that hour in the day.
Absolutely.
And so that's what I think is really sort of at the heart of it all, is going to that spot and figuring out, really allowing yourself to do it. Because it's figuring out when to do it, how to do it, but really letting yourself do the thing that you're afraid of. Because it really is pretty scary. It is for me, at least.
Yeah.
Am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to be able to keep up this pace for 3 miles today? Am I going to be able to keep it up for 5 miles next week, which is what you want to do? But when you do it and then you feel the benefits from it, it's just so empowering.
Yeah.
And when you get through that workout and you know that you've sort of gone to the well and to use the other cliche, sort of left it all out there, not left it all out there, but left it as much as you could out there. That's about as good a feeling as you can get, no matter what your watch says.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for explaining that. And I think most people listening, should have some kind of image in their head of what that looks like for them. And kind of the book explains a lot more about what that means. I know a lot of people struggle with that concept, especially in my training plans that my husband Steve wrote. It's all by effort, and people really struggle with that kind of area of, how it's hard, but not too hard. So I think the book will help kind of explain that if you kind of trying to understand it in a, I guess, qualitative way rather than just looking at numbers. So, and then the other thing that you mentioned, is really important to Bob, running in a group. Now, there's a few things I want to ask you about that. Now, you said in the book something along the lines of running alone is kind of a failure to get everything out of the run that you can. But from what I heard of you, you mostly run alone, as do most people probably listening. It's difficult to find people to run with at the times they have to run, or maybe they live somewhere where it's not really possible to run with a group. So what does that mean for the rest of us? Like, are we really leaving things on the table by not running in a group from what you found?
I think we might be. I think I might be. Which is okay. I mean, like all these things we're talking about going to your edge and doing it. One of my yoga gurus, name is John Salvatore. I'm kind of addicted to hot yoga in addition to running. And, John has this great phrase that he says, like, sometimes when you're in class, and he says, look, whatever you brought to class today, whoever you are, it's like, that's enough.
Mm.
Okay? And it's the idea that, like, it's okay. So if you're doing any of the some workout and it's not quite what you wanted it to be, like, it was as good as you could make it. That's all it is. It's okay for not every workout to be perfect or to have a bad run sometimes, and have, it's totally fine. And I think that message doesn't get across enough, especially today when, like, everybody's like, oh, I crushed my 14 miler yesterday. And so few people are, posting about the horrible interval workout that they tried to do and completely melted in the humidity halfway through it.
Mm-hmm.
It's that sort of weird social media culture where it's so aspirational.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of running with a group, it's just, I wish I did it more often. And, I feel like my best runs are always with people.
Mm-hmm.
Or oftentimes are with people. And someone said something to me interesting yesterday. He said, I can't run alone, but, I can't run with a group all the time. And this is a great benefit of social media in one way. He said, but because of apps like Strava, he can see what other people are doing or have done on the route that he's doing that day. And so he kind of feels like he's running with the other people that are doing it. And he said to me, does that count? And I said, well, if you feel like it counts, it counts. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, in the same way that maybe it's not as satisfying as human contact, in the same way that I don't think, like, texting someone is nearly as satisfying as either picking up the phone and talking to them, or, on the much better level, actually sitting next to them, mm-hmm. or going for a walk or something like that. But if you feel like you're in a group that way, then great, then you're in a group. So yeah, I think look, I think we're social animals, and I think we really learn from each other, and we think we draw off each other's energy, mm-hmm. and we pick each other up when the other one's feeling down, and they pick us up when we're feeling down. And so I have to believe that, like, there's a lot of times when I'm running alone where I probably would have been able to go a little better or mm-hmm. harder or smarter or just happier mm-hmm. if I was with somebody else.
See, I don't know if it's just because I'm so far removed from it at this point, but I mean, I haven't really ever had, or I say ever, haven't had people kind of training with me week after week, pushing me since I was probably 15, 16 years old, and I'm 30 now. But for me, when I had odd occasions where I would be doing workouts with a group, I found myself getting quite frustrated because someone was either starting out too fast, and I didn't like starting too fast. I like, negative splitting things, or they were kind of zigzagging in front of me, and that drove me crazy, or just, various things. And I get the concept, and I think it probably would be the case that once you get used to it. But I wonder how many people would actually struggle initially to be in a group because of that reason. Because when you run on your own, you're so used to doing things exactly how you like them. And in a group, you kind of have to conform to other people in the group.
I think there's probably a good balance. I think, and you see it a lot with, working people like me, who aren't full-time run. It's not our full-time job to be a runner, or not my full-time job to be a runner. So I think, like, if once a week I was running with a group, I did my long runs with a group, or mm-hmm. I did this speed workout or something like that with a group, and then had the other days to have those sort of meditative runs that I'm, just completely addicted to. They're sort of when I do my best writing. They're when I do my best thinking. They're when I think really deeply about, like, how I could be a better dad or mm-hmm. friend or things like that. I'd sort of want to I guess I'd say having a balance of the two. I think is probably the best.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would agree. I think I would like to do that. But yeah, that was just something I was thinking about. All right. So speaking of groups, I want to talk about kind of the professional, the elite level side of things, which I didn't really know or understand that much about. How much of an impact Bob had on things, not just the first time around with the first running boom, but also kind of essentially the second time around. For those listening who I had no idea about this, but kind of you talked about the US kind of losing a lot of its like competitiveness within the world of distance running, and how this is where your journalistic side came in, because you could actually like address this head on. How a lot of that came from kind of Alberto Salazar kind of essentially, you said, running himself into a wall, but kind of running his body to the point of where it completely broke. And then people were kind of scared to go near that area again. Could you maybe tell us a bit about what happened there, and then how Bob got to the point where he was like, this needs to change. We need to get back to where we were before.
Well, Alberto Salazar, if there is anyone who doesn't know him out there, because he's getting like all of us, he's getting a little old. But he won 3 straight New York marathons. He was the best marathoner in the world at the time when Americans were the best marathoners in the world, and he was going to have his crowning moment at the 1984 Olympics when he was going to win the Olympic marathon, and he was going to he had no plans on retiring, but at that point, he would probably be able to claim himself to be the best distance runner of all time. And after 1982, he actually never won another marathon. And he just started to get injured and misdiagnosed and had bad surgeries. And I believe he came in 15th at the 1984 marathon instead of winning it. That was in Los Angeles, where he was supposed to win on home soil. But it didn't work out that way. And he sort of spiraled for the next many years until he figured out that, what he was suffering from was a combination of depression and bad treatment of injuries that probably rest would have been the best prescription for them.
Can I just pause you? Do you think had he been told rest, would he have been able to actually rest?
Probably not.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
But he might have. But maybe if it was put to him in the right way, I don't know. Are there doctors that there's probably some doctors and trainers that you have listened to and others that you haven't?
Yeah.
Right, because you've probably had some pretty nasty injuries, right? From over.
I have been pretty lucky overall, but I've had some that yes. I know exactly what you're saying. Some people I have kind of been like, yeah, they obviously don't know what they're talking about, and I've kind of ignored them. But yeah,
right. Or some people may have just been wanted to say like, I treat Alberto Salazar, rather than doing the hard work of being a doctor, which is to build that trust equation with your patient, and that it's not just a patient, it's not just a runner, that it's a human being. Like, this is a very personal connection that you're having with him. So I think there was probably someone who could have made him listen, maybe, but you never quite know. But anyway, people took like a real false lesson from his failures, in the sense that nobody trained harder than he did. This is a guy who literally almost ran himself to death in the Falmouth Road Race, and just would run 160 miles a week, and just was a tremendous trainer. And when he ran into that wall, people started to think you only get a certain number of steps in your life, in your running career, and then they're used up. So you better be careful with how you use them, and you better not use them all on the training roads, because then you won't have them there when it's race day, and those roads are race roads instead of training roads. And so all of a sudden people were topping out at like 90 miles a week, and you can have a whole conversation about whether it's best to run volume or whether it's best to run less volume and more intensity. But there's a certain base level of volume that I think, to be an elite marathoner these days, everyone accepts you've got to sort of get to. And it's probably in the 110, 120 mile a week range. And then that's also goes without saying that, pretty much every mile has to have a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just piling on miles that, you're not just piling on slow miles on your body. Everyone has to have a purpose. But, people really dialed back the training. And then there was this, and then through the 90s, you had the rise of the East Africans. And all of a sudden people started thinking, well, they have these special bodies that evolved on the Serengeti, and their Achilles tendons are longer and their muscle fibers are different. And Bob was coaching at UCLA at the time and watching all this and focusing on winning these national championships and coaching these quarter milers and really super fast guys to gold medals. And finally he just got frustrated and he said, this is just bullshit. These people are they're not different than any of us. They're just working harder, mm-hmm. and they're doing it at altitude. They're doing it in the Rift Valley, and they're doing essentially everything I did with the Hummel Toads back in the early 70s when we came out of nowhere to win that national championship. And they're doing it at altitude. And we're just not doing that right now. We're not working hard enough. And so he committed to creating a training group that was based on the Hummel Toads and moving them to altitude up at Mammoth. And that's where Meb and Dina Castor came from.
Mm-hmm. And in that group that they moved up to Mammoth, he was working alongside Joe Vigil. And you didn't really address this in the book. This is why I wanted to ask this specifically. But I find it really hard to imagine two coaches of that level working with athletes of that caliber being able to kind of put their egos aside and working together. Like, how did that work? Like, were they doing the same training, or was it kind of Joe was coaching Dina and Bob was coaching Meb and or the other athletes in between? Or were they literally explain that to me. I'm not saying you're wrong in any way. I just explain how that worked with the two of them.
Well, I mean, you have two unique characters there. You have Bob, who is, I'm going to lean on a cliche here, but he is the essence of Midwestern humility. Spent his first 12 years of his life in Minnesota, and, that's the blood that runs through his veins. He has that phenomenal trait that all incredibly successful people have, which is they know what they don't know, and they're very comfortable asking for help. So when Bob realizes that, we need to be like the Kenyans and the Ethiopians, what are they doing? They're training in a group and they're doing it at altitude. He thinks, well, I've spent my whole life coaching in San Diego and Los Angeles, which are both at 0 feet above sea level. But there's this guy, Joe Vigil, who's been studying altitude training for 30 years. Really was the first person in America who began to study this stuff back in the 60s, ahead of the Mexico City Olympics in 1968. He was content to spend his coaching career at, Adams State in Colorado, mm-hmm. which was, not exactly Oregon in terms of reputation or cosmopolitan area or mm-hmm. really anything. And, so both of these guys, where they came together was, what I was talking about before. They pursued running not because it was a way to feed their egos. They pursued it because they were passionate about it. They loved it. They loved the science of it. They loved the competition, but they also were sort of married to this larger purpose, which was to bring the country back and put it back on the map where it had been mm-hmm. 25 years before, mm-hmm. and get people running fast again. Mm-hmm. And so now Bob did bring Meb to the table, and Dina had been working with Joe, but there was a lot of cross-pollination there once they got to Mammoth, and they all sort of worked together. I think you do have two unique characters.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And obviously there was another whole group of people kind of going in and out as well, who also were there, which, you'll recognize, to the listeners, you'll recognize many of the other names that were there. Now, how much of, the success going in distance running today, particularly coming out of groups, Nazalite is coming to mind, Oregon Project coming to mind. How much do you think this is all just a continuation of what they did? Because, from that group came Hanson's and came the big, obviously Zap Fitness in North Carolina. There was another one. But anyway, these other groups kind of came out as well. All this success that's kind of coming along, all these, how US distance running is really coming along. Do you think this has all just kind of been building from that time?
There's no question. I mean, that was that's the start of it. The sports is very much a copycat business. People see something that works and they recreate it. I mentioned Moneyball before, and it was all of a sudden, there was a focus on guys who could get on base, and nobody cared about batting average, and that's why the Oakland A's were winning, and that's what it was. There was an inefficiency in the market, and this was really sort of exploiting an inefficiency, and it really worked. These people went to altitude and worked really hard and trained in a group. And, in 2000, Americans qualified one man for the marathon at the Olympics. And that was really just a charity spot, and came home with 0 medals, of course. And, in 2004, there's 6 marathon medals awarded at the Olympics. And that little group in Mammoth got 2 of them, which is a pretty good ratio for any little group. So that's really what sprung up. And it really started, nobody was doing altitude training, and Bob took Meb there first in 2001, and they did a long camp before a 10,000 meter race at Stanford. And that was the meet where Bob Kennedy was supposed to break the 10,000 record, American record that had stood for about 15 years. And Bob Kennedy ends up dropping out of the race, and Meb comes out of nowhere to break the record. And everyone says, whoa, what the hell happened? Where have you been? Like, where did you come from? And the answer is, well, we've been in Mammoth. And all of a sudden, success breeds copycats.
That's so true. And I actually love that part of the book that you really went into Meb's story. I haven't read his book, so that was interesting for me to read that and kind of go through his journey in detail, whereas I'd kind of seen it from the sidelines. And you also weaved in your own story was it once a chapter, or every now and again there was a little excerpt from something that you were going through. And I loved reading that in there. I actually looked forward to that part as well, to kind of see where you were at in your journey compared to kind of this longer version within Bob's journey, which was interesting. So for my listeners, I really think this is the kind of book that many of you will be interested in learning about and reading about. And there's one more thing I want to kind of go into, just we're getting short on time here, but you've talked about Nike in the book and how some of the decisions made towards Bob, towards Meb in particular, were not exactly maybe the way they should have acted, and kind of confirm a lot of the things many of us have heard over the years. Now, Nike kind of goes in and out of the media with doing good things and then getting in trouble for doing something. Do you think that they will ever really kind of learn their lesson and, basically stop treating people, so badly, unless they've kind of proven, I don't know, because even Meb proved himself, but, they pushed him back and insulted him. But do you think they'll ever really learn their lesson?
I think they sort of have to be taught lessons, or I don't know. Maybe it's the nature of a big multinational corporation that they inevitably make all kinds of crazy mistakes. I mean, when you talk about the book, there's really 3 crazy mistakes they make. One is, with the Hummel toads, and this is not a crazy mistake. This is in the early days of distance running, and Bob is looking for some sponsorship money to get to the national championships, and he goes to one of his friends at Nike and says, can you sponsor us? And he asks him who's on his team, and he tells him, and he says, never heard of any of those guys. I don't think you have much of a chance. And, sure enough, they go on and win. And then they cut Meb in 2010, or they decide to lowball him on the contract renewal after he's, won the New York Marathon, and they had put him off for a while. So that was really, I would think, a fairly shameful thing to do. But that was also originally Bob had gone to Nike to try and get some sponsorship money for the Mammoth Track Club. And the original thing was, well, we want to be the main, we would want to be the main sponsor and have our name on the shirt and everything like that. And Bob said, well, that's not what this is about. These are not going to all be Nike runners. And they weren't interested. Ultimately, they gave him about $30,000, which, is probably what they were paying Tiger Woods in about, 3 hours. And that's the entirety of what they gave an effort to revive American distance running. Mm-hmm. So they've done, they don't come off great in this book. But, more recently, I think you talk about what can Nike learn? A month ago, Nike had to be sort of shamed into treating women athletes with some sort of equanimity and, not punishing them for getting pregnant, and, literally writing into their contracts that, you're not going to get paid if you get pregnant because you can't perform for us. And, then yesterday,
you're giving away when we're recording this.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. And then the women, well, I'll just, and then the women, U.S. women's team wins the World Cup. And, what's the first commercial you see?
Yes.
This Nike commercial about women's empowerment and, all this belief in yourself and all that kind of crap. And I say crap because, it's coming from them, because my middle daughter's 17 and she's showing me this commercial, which is making the rounds on social media, and she's feeling great about it. And so I had to sort of remind her that, this is coming from the company that was screwing over its female athletes a month ago until it was publicly exposed.
And didn't they do that a month before the other one came out with, they did something else, didn't they? And I remember reading that Alicia Montano said she had to kind of grit her teeth when that one came out because it just didn't go along with what she'd said, what she'd experienced.
So, I mean, look, it's, people can think of whatever they want about Nike. They have a very powerful marketing arm. They do a lot of great things. Mm-hmm. Jerry Schumacher's group and Shalane Flanagan, they're doing wonderful things up there. But it's a big multinational corporation, and they like every other public company and public entity, they kind of need to be held accountable for when they do things that may not be in the best interests of some values that a lot of people and a lot of consumers might hold as important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do want to just, I know many of my listeners have listened to the episode with Justin Gallegos, who they do sponsor and work with. He has cerebral palsy, and, so they are doing things that are good. But that's why I was just curious when I said about making mistakes, because they seem to go up and then go down, like not quite drastically as well. In people's opinions. So just thought I would get your word on that as the journalist. So thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, just have 4 more questions for you. Just these final wrap-up questions, starting with a piece of advice you'd like to give the listeners for life.
I think it's getting back to a little bit of what we talked about before, which is, do the thing you're afraid of. Mm-hmm. I will tell you the thing that I'm terrified of right now is doing a trail race. Doing a trail ultra, and I've never gone more than 26.2 miles in a race before, and it's always been on pavement with lots of water stations and things like that. And somebody recently made me promise that next year I would do my first trail race. I live in New York City, so I'm kind of scared of running into bears and other kinds of wildlife in the woods, and so it's not going to be comfortable. I'm kind of terrified of it at the moment. but I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
All right. Like I'm going to get.
Well, you've publicly announced it now, so
yes,
no going back.
I'm going to figure out a way to do this. I don't know if it's going to be in January or when exactly.
December 31, you're running it before.
But, and because I really think like when we do the things that scare us, like, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
I don't know that I often regret things that I do. I usually regret the things I don't do.
Mm-hmm. No, that's exactly right. I think we all can attest to that. All right, one person to follow on social media and why?
I'm going to plug my friend Jason Gay, who is the columnist at the Wall Street Journal. And it's just because he's really funny.
Okay.
And he's really smart. And he sort of always just sort of points out the complete absurdity of, sports and lots of other aspects of life. And, it's good to, you need to laugh a little bit throughout the day.
For sure. In this time of our lives. How do you want to be remembered on this show?
On this show.
Or in life, if you prefer.
In my life. I guess in life, I'd probably like to be remembered as just, a good dad, I think. And I hope that sort of comes across, because a lot of the things I've said on this show are, things that I try not to lecture my kids with too many life lessons, but you sort of feel obligated to sprinkle it in here and there. So I guess that's probably the way I'd most like to. The thing I'd prefer not to screw up is.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. And I definitely feel the same way with being a mother. All right. And finally, tell us a running for real moment, something that only runners will understand.
I don't know that only runners will understand this, but it gets a little bit back to my point of being a good dad. And I have 3 daughters and they are athletic, but I think having them going through these teenage years and having this sort of the body issues that are so common and navigating that as a parent and understanding, what you can say, what you can't say.
You mean you or just in general?
Oh, me specifically, as the thing that I've sort of that is like a constant struggle is sort of being supportive and trying to understand where they are. That's sort of if all the things I think about that, like I wish I could have back, and where I screwed up as a father. A lot of them have to do with. I really feel for all teenagers, but especially teenage girls and athletic teenage girls and the body issues they deal with. Yeah. So those moments, I mean, there's a handful of specific ones I could talk about, but then I'd probably embarrass my daughters. Then
you're in trouble.
Then I'd be screwing up even more. But they know what I'm talking about. Okay. So those are tough moments, and you wish you had some of them back. And I hope they've come out of it understanding that.
I'm sure they will.
Who they are is enough.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I'm sure they will. And you can send them this podcast. They just have to listen to an hour of running conversation before they get to it. But
that's the lead. They've listened to many more hours.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Than that, as you can imagine.
Okay, so I will put a link in the show notes to your book, Running to the Edge. But where else can people find you if they want to follow along? We mentioned that you are the deputy sports editor of the New York Times, but so they can obviously find you there. But where else can people find you?
I'm on Twitter occasionally at Matt Futterman. I'm not very good at tweeting. I'm not very pithy, so I'm not on there that much. But I am occasionally. I'm on Facebook. Matt Futterman is there. My page is open. Instagram, I think I'm at MattFut1. And just email me at matt.futterman@nytimes.com. It's probably the easiest way to get to me personally, and always happy to share that.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us and just for writing this book. As I said to my listeners, I really think this is one you will enjoy. It is, for those of you in the superstars, it is right up your alley. And I loved reading it, and I think you will too. So thank you so much for being here, Matt.
Thanks, Tina. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you to MetPro for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. Now, friends, today I have something exciting for you. Rather than a traditional ad like we would usually had, I thought we would save the end of this episode to kind of go over a question that either one of you have had, you've sent it in to me, or is a common question that maybe you're thinking about but haven't had the courage or haven't decided to answer yet. So I have Angelo Poli of MetPro here today to ask him this question, and then he's going to answer it for you and maybe shed some light on what you might be wondering about. So Angelo, thank you for, coming on here to do this for me today.
Oh, thank you, Tina.
Starting, I would like the first question of this ad to be, is carb restriction healthy and is it sustainable? That's a question that people often wonder about. I get a lot of questions about this, and I know you do too. So what would you say to that?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll try and be as brief as I can. There's a bit to it. So Like anything, it's simply a tool. So it's not a matter of good or bad or healthy or unhealthy. It's a matter of understanding how it works and how your body's going to respond to it. At MetPro, we will sometimes use some carb manipulations and sometimes we don't, depending on the participants' athletics, their goals, and really what their body is currently used to. So here's a couple of the good attributes about managing carbohydrates. It can be a satiating meal plan if you have more healthy fats in your diet, and it can help control sugar cravings. Mm-hmm. Now, some of the potential negatives is that with carb restriction, you're signing up for basically a measure of carbohydrate sensitivity and paying the carbohydrate cost if you deviate, or if in dieting terms, if you cheat on the diet, which is more dramatic than the calorie cost. So here's what that means. So let's say somebody is trying to manage their weight and they're watching their calories, and they decide on the weekend, family's coming in or they're going on a vacation, that they're going to give themselves a little bit of breathing room. That's fine. If your body is simply used to calorie control, you could gain a pound or two over the weekend if you're not eating as clean. But if you've conditioned your body to be used to very low carbohydrates, a day or two of back to normal carbohydrate consumption, you wouldn't be surprised to wake up 5-6 pounds heavier on Monday. It's possible. And the reason has to do with how your body manages carb depletion and replenishment. When you restrict carbohydrates, your body kind of becomes sensitive to carbs. And then when it finally sees available carbs, it replenishes your glucose or glycogen stock in your muscles. And each gram of sugar in your muscles is buffered with 3 grams of water. So that's why you see both more rapid weight fluctuation when you eliminate or decrease carbohydrates and more rapid weight increase when you put them back. So the question I'm always trying to get at is, are you the right person to implement that one tool? And so if somebody tells me that, I like watching what I eat and I don't mind following a meal plan, but I really want to be able to have the weekends to be a little bit more liberal, or I can diet for a day or two and then I have an off day. Carbohydrate restriction probably isn't the best fit for your circumstance right now. So you're going to get the carb sensitivity and you're not going to see as much of the weight benefit.
Very interesting.
Whereas if somebody says, I'm the type of person that can follow through and understand that for a time, I'll be more carbohydrate sensitive and I can be consistent and even go through a gradual reintegration process where I'm slowly getting my body used to eating more carbs again over several weeks towards the end. then it can be a potent tool and it might be a good fit for you. So the answer is never black and white. It's a matter of understanding the tool and how your body responds.
Great. Well, thank you so much for explaining that. That kind of lifts a lot of confusion off with this topic. And it is something that I get asked about all the time. And I'm glad that I finally have an answer to give people. So, Angelo, thank you so much for answering the question. And for those of you listening, metpro.co/Tina, you can go find out some more information. You can get your free consultation with MetPro. Go do it now. My friends, if you have a minute and you could leave a review on your favorite podcast player, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or whatever else podcast player you use to listen to this podcast, or if you would subscribe to this podcast, you will help me get out in front of new runners to make our tribe even bigger and even better. It might not seem like you as one person can make a difference, but really it helps a lot. And it shows me you appreciate the hard work I put in for those. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed his book. I really enjoyed his conversation. And I really enjoy him as a person. He's a really just thoughtful and just great guy who loves running and feels that passion that we all understand. He also is really proud of his Sarah Sellers piece that was in the New York Times. I'll put a link to that in the show notes if you are interested. And I know many of you are Sarah Sellers fans, so it will be one that will perk your ears up. You can also get the show notes emailed to you weekly if you want to. Just send me an email, tina@tinamuir.com, and tell me you would like me to email you the show notes every Friday. That means I don't have to keep reminding you. You don't have to keep going to check on it. I did ask you at the beginning if there's any way you could leave me a review for a late birthday present. I would appreciate that. That's all I'm going to say. And next week we have Lauren Fleshman on the show. She is real. She is raw. She's just exactly what you expect, actually even better. We didn't talk too much running in this episode. We talked about so much more, just more meaningful topics. And she's just as wonderful as you would expect her to be. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and have a wonderful week, my friends.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.